Chapter 1. Ordinary Days. The sound of sizzling bacon filled the kitchen, mingling with the sharp aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Daniel stood at the stove, spatula in hand, wearing the same gray t-shirt and faded sweatpants he threw on every morning. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting striped patterns across the dining table, where Jessica scrolled through her phone with one hand and absent-mindedly stirred her coffee with the other. Ellie sat opposite her mother, earbuds in, thumbs flying across the screen of her phone, the faint sound of pop music leaking through. Daniel placed a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon on the table, then dropped a stack of toast next to it. "Breakfast is served," he said with forced cheer, hoping for at least a smile from one of them. "Thanks," Jessica murmured, not looking up. Her voice was soft but carried the tone of someone lost in another world. Her eyes locked on the screen as if the news or whoever she was texting mattered more than this moment. "Dad, did you make any of that avocado toast you keep talking about?" Ellie asked without glancing up. Daniel grinned and sat down, pulling off the oven mitt he still had on. "What do you think this is, a hipster cafe? You're lucky I didn't burn the bacon again. Besides, I'm not sure we can afford your avocado toast habit if I'm paying for college and everything else." Ellie rolled her eyes, her lips curling into a half-smile. "So dramatic, Dad. It's like $2 for an avocado." "Yeah, but you and your mother go through them like they're free," Daniel shot back playfully. "I swear I buy a bag on Sunday, and by Tuesday they're all gone." Jessica finally looked up, smirking faintly. Maybe if you didn't work such long hours, you'd notice how much your daughter eats. Teenagers burn through food like wildfire. Her comment was casual, but it stung a little. Daniel picked up his coffee mug, using the moment to hide his expression. He worked long hours because he wanted them to have everything. It wasn't like he enjoyed missing family dinners or Ellie's school events, but someone had to pay for the mortgage, Ellie's tuition, and Jessica's online shopping splurges that she brushed off as just little treats. "You're probably right," he said lightly. "Guess I'm just trying to keep us afloat while the two of you spend all the avocados." Ellie laughed, but Jessica's attention had already drifted back to her phone. Daniel studied her as he buttered his toast. She looked effortlessly beautiful this morning, even in her loose sweater and messy bun. It always amazed him how she could make casual look like something out of a magazine. But there was something different in the way her face softened as she read her messages, like whoever was on the other end brought out a warmth that wasn't there when she spoke to him. "Hey," Daniel said suddenly, trying to pull her back into the room. "What do you say we plan a little getaway this summer? Just the two of us. Maybe a weekend at the lake house." Jessica glanced up briefly, as though she'd heard him but wasn't really processing. "The lake house?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yeah, like old times," Daniel said, forcing a hopeful grin. "We could leave Ellie with your mom for the weekend. You and me, no phones, no work. Just us." Ellie made a face. "Wow, thanks for volunteering me for Grandma's house. Guess I don't get a vote." "You'll survive 2 days without Wi-Fi," Daniel teased. "Think of it as detox." Jessica sighed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't know, Daniel. Summer's going to be busy. I've got the fundraiser at work and Ellie's college stuff to sort out. Maybe another time." "Another time," Daniel repeated quietly, taking a bite of toast to mask his disappointment. It wasn't the first time she'd brushed off the idea of spending time together. He told himself it was just life getting in the way. After all, they'd been married for over 18 years. People get busy. He forced a smile. "All right, I'll take a rain check. But don't think I won't bug you about it later." Ellie snorted. "You sound like a salesman." "Limited time offer, Mom. Book now." Daniel chuckled despite the hollow feeling in his chest. "Hey, I'm the king of persistence. That's how I convinced your mom to date me in the first place." Jessica looked up just long enough to smirk, but there was no sparkle in her eyes. "Yeah, you wore me down," she said. It was meant as a joke, but something about the way she said it made Daniel feel like she meant it. The kitchen fell quiet except for the clinking of silverware. Daniel sipped his coffee, his mind wandering as he watched Ellie scroll through her phone, completely lost in her world. Why had they stopped talking at breakfast? When had mornings become just another routine where he played chef and they played distracted audience? Hey, Ellie, he said, trying again. Any news from the colleges yet? She looked up, momentarily startled. Oh yeah, I got the acceptance letter from state last week. Mom told you, right? Daniel froze. No, she didn't. Jessica looked up sharply. I thought I mentioned it. Must have slipped my mind. You didn't, Daniel said with a faint frown. That's big news. Congrats, kiddo. I'm proud of you. He reached across the table to ruffle Ellie's hair, but she squirmed away with an embarrassed grin. Thanks, Dad, she mumbled. Daniel leaned back, staring at Jessica for a second longer than necessary. How could she forget to tell him something like that? He shook it off. Maybe she'd just been busy. It didn't mean anything. As the plates emptied, Jessica stood and gathered the dishes. I've got to run. Big meeting today, she said, glancing at her phone again. Ellie, your ride's at 8. Don't be late. Right? Daniel asked. Yeah, Mom's friend is dropping me at school, Ellie said casually. Daniel's eyebrows rose. Friend? Since when does your mom have time for new friends? Jessica shot him a look. Don't start, Daniel. It's just someone from the fundraiser committee. He offered. It's convenient. Daniel forced a laugh. Guess I'm the last to know anything these days. Jessica didn't reply, already grabbing her purse. As she walked out, Daniel stared at the doorway, the lingering scent of her perfume mingling with the coffee and bacon. Something fell off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Surface. It started with little things Daniel would have shrugged off in the past. A new perfume bottle on Jessica's dresser. Something expensive with a designer label he didn't remember buying. A pair of heels tucked in the closet, the kind Jessica never wore anymore because she always said her feet hurt after wearing them for years. Then there were the shopping trips. Daniel came home early one Thursday evening, the factory having shut down an hour ahead of schedule. He walked through the front door expecting the usual sounds. Ellie's music playing upstairs, the television humming softly in the living room. Instead, he found the house quiet, almost too quiet. Jessica's car wasn't in the driveway. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie, and saw a note on the counter. Went out for some errands. Back late. Don't wait up. He stared at the handwriting. Jessica never stayed out late on errands. She was usually home by the time he kicked off his work boots. He glanced at his watch. It was nearly 7 p.m. Ellie appeared at the bottom of the stairs, holding her phone. Hey, Dad. Mom texted me like an hour ago. Said she's going shopping with a friend. Shopping? Daniel asked, raising an eyebrow. Since when does she shop this late? Ellie shrugged, scrolling on her phone. I don't know. Maybe she just wants a break. You know, she works hard too. Daniel didn't argue. Instead, he forced a smile and said, Guess it's just you and me for dinner then. Pizza. Yeah, Ellie said with a grin, finally looking up. But don't get the cheap stuff again, Dad. That's basically cardboard with sauce. Hey, I worked my butt off for this cardboard. Daniel shot back with mock offense, and she laughed. But that night, when he lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling, something gnawed at him. Jessica came home after midnight, tiptoeing into the bedroom as though not to wake him. He pretended to be asleep, but the scent of her new perfume clung to the room, unfamiliar and sharp, and it kept him awake for hours. Over the next week, the small changes piled up. Jessica seemed to be constantly on her phone, smiling at texts she didn't share. When Daniel asked who she was talking to, she'd say, Oh, just a friend from work. We're planning the fundraiser. But Daniel noticed the way she angled her phone away when he came into the room, her thumbs sliding over the screen like she had something to hide. On Sunday morning, while Daniel was pouring coffee, Ellie's voice cut through his thoughts like a knife. You know, Dad, she said from the kitchen island, Mom deserves better than someone who's never home. Just saying. Daniel froze, coffee pot in hand. What's that supposed to mean? Ellie rolled her eyes, chewing on a piece of toast. You're always at work. She's always alone. Maybe she's just, I don't know, bored. Daniel set the pot down with more force than necessary, spilling a few drops onto the counter. I work so you can have that phone in your hand and go to that college you want. I'm doing all of this for you and your mom. Yeah, well, Ellie shrugged and muttered under her breath. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it. Daniel wanted to say more, but Jessica walked in, dressed in a cream-colored blouse, her hair curled. She looked incredible, like she was headed for a photo shoot instead of the grocery store. You look nice, Daniel said, forcing a smile. What's the occasion? Just going shopping. Jessica replied casually, grabbing her purse. In heels, Daniel asked, half joking but half serious. You don't wear those unless we're going somewhere fancy. Jessica paused, looking at him with a hint of irritation. What's with the third degree? I'm meeting with a friend at the boutique. It's nothing. Friend, Daniel pressed, folding his arms. Who's this friend? Jessica sighed. Do we have to do this right now? I don't interrogate you about who you talk to at work. Daniel raised his hands. I'm not interrogating. Just asking. I hardly see you these days. Feels like you're, I don't know, distant. Her face softened for a moment, but only slightly. Daniel, I'm just busy. The fundraiser, Ellie's college stuff, everything. I'm tired, okay? Can we not turn this into a thing? He nodded slowly, but the unease in his chest didn't fade. That night, after Jessica went to bed early claiming exhaustion, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, looking over the monthly budget. The numbers weren't adding up. Jessica's credit card bill was higher than usual, clothing boutiques, a high-end spa, and a charge for what looked like a luxury restaurant. He rubbed his forehead. Since when do we have this kind of extra spending? He muttered under his breath. The sound of footsteps startled him. Ellie walked in, wearing pajamas, her hair tied back. Still working? Just looking at the bills, Daniel said with a tired smile. Trying to figure out how to pay for college and everything else. Don't stress, Dad, she said nonchalantly. Mom says you'll figure it out. You always do. Daniel sighed, closing the laptop. Yeah, I guess I will. The next evening, Daniel and Jessica sat in the living room after Ellie had gone upstairs. Daniel turned down the volume on the TV. Jess, can we talk about money? He began. Jessica looked up from her phone. What about it? College tuition for Ellie is coming up fast. I want to make sure we're on the same page. I've been putting in overtime to cover the costs, but these extra expenses, he trailed off, hesitant. Are you buying all these new clothes for the fundraiser? Jessica's expression hardened slightly. Is this your way of accusing me of something? Because I don't appreciate it. I'm not accusing you, Daniel said quickly. I feel like I'm working myself to death, and we're drifting apart. I'm trying to plan for us, for Ellie's future, but I can't do it alone if I don't know what's going on. Jessica sighed, placing her phone on the coffee table. Daniel, you're overthinking everything. I handle the house, Ellie, the social stuff. You handle work. That's how it's always been. Can we not make this into some big drama? Daniel stared at her for a long moment. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to think that this was just stress, that maybe he was imagining the walls closing in. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Chapter 3, The Phone Call. The afternoon sun painted streaks of orange across the quiet suburban street as Daniel's truck rumbled into the driveway. It was only 4:30 p.m., a rarity for him to be home this early. A sudden power outage at the plant had sent everyone home for the day, and for once, Daniel felt a flicker of excitement at the thought of surprising his family. Maybe they'd have an early dinner together. Maybe he'd even suggest a movie night. He parked, grabbed his thermos from the passenger seat, and walked toward the front door. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. As he stepped inside, the warmth of home wrapped around him, familiar yet oddly hollow. He kicked off his boots and set them on the mat, listening for the usual signs of life. Jessica's voice in the kitchen, Ellie's music upstairs. Nothing. Then he heard it. A voice, Ellie's voice, drifting from the hallway that led to her room. He caught a few words, muffled at first, but enough to make him pause. Daniel leaned against the wall, just out of sight, straining to hear. No, Ellie, my dad's still as clueless as ever, his daughter said, her tone casual, almost mocking. Mom's boyfriend even drops me off at school in his fancy car sometimes. Daniel froze. The world around him seemed to collapse into silence. His chest tightened, his breath catching in his throat. Mom's boyfriend? The words slammed into him like a brick to the gut. Ellie laughed lightly. Yeah, they're just waiting for my loser dad to finish funding my college before they ditch him and move to Miami. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Loser dad. Ditch him. Move to Miami. Each word dug into him like a blade. He pressed a hand against the wall for support, his knees threatening to buckle. Inside Ellie's room, she continued talking, completely unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. No, it's not weird. He's cool. Way cooler than my dad. He takes me to this cafe downtown sometimes. He knows all the trendy places. Mom says he's really good with money too. Like, not broke and working overtime every night like dad. Daniel's heart pounded so hard he could hear it echo in his ears. He felt like he'd stumbled into someone else's life, a stranger's life, where he wasn't the father who worked himself to exhaustion to provide for his family, but a punchline to his own daughter's jokes. For a long moment, he couldn't move. He wanted to barge into that room, demand answers, scream, cry, anything to shatter this nightmare. But his body betrayed him. He stood there, frozen, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief and pain. Ellie giggled again. I know, right? Honestly, I can't wait until it's just Mom and me. We'll be living in Miami, soaking up the sun while Dad's stuck here in his boring job. Anyway, I gotta go before he gets home. Bye. The call ended. Silence fell. Daniel backed away from the hallway, his breath shallow. He felt like he'd been punched in the stomach, like the air had been stolen from the room. Slowly, he sank into the couch, his hands trembling as they clutched his knees. Mom's boyfriend. The words echoed in his head, relentless and cruel. Jessica had a boyfriend? All those late-night errands, the fancy clothes, the perfume. Suddenly, they weren't innocent anymore. And Ellie knew. His own daughter knew. Worse, she mocked him for it. He stared at the family photos on the mantel, the one of Jessica leaning against his shoulder at the lake house years ago, Ellie smiling between them with her missing front teeth. Back then, he believed they were unshakable, a family built on love and trust. Now it felt like a lie. Dad! Ellie's voice broke his thoughts. He jerked his head up to see her standing at the bottom of the stairs, phone still in hand, her face a mix of surprise and curiosity. You're home early. Everything okay? Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. He studied her face, his little girl, who wasn't so little anymore, who had just called him a loser without knowing he'd heard every word. Yeah, he said finally, forcing his voice to sound normal. Power went out at work. Came home early. Ellie nodded, glancing toward the kitchen. Cool. You want me to start dinner or something? Mom said she'd be home late again. Daniel shook his head. No, I'll handle it. His voice was calm, but inside he was anything but. As Ellie retreated back upstairs, Daniel stood there, gripping the edge of the couch until his knuckles turned white. He didn't confront her. He couldn't. Not yet. He needed to breathe. He needed to think. The rest of the evening crawled by like a slow, agonizing drip. Daniel cooked dinner in silence, his mind spinning. He could hear Ellie moving around upstairs, laughing softly at something on her phone, her carefree tone a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. Jessica didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't even come home until after 10 p.m. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in, smiling faintly like nothing was wrong. Hey, you're up late. Everything okay? She asked, tossing her purse on the counter. Daniel stared at her, the words on the tip of his tongue. Who's the guy? How long has this been going on? But he swallowed them, forcing a smile that felt like glass cracking in his chest. Yeah, he said quietly. Everything's fine. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, Daniel sat alone in the dark living room, staring at the glowing screen of his phone. He thought about calling Jessica out, about asking Ellie what she knew. But the betrayal still felt too raw, too fresh. He wasn't ready. All he could do was sit there, replaying Ellie's words in his mind over and over until they burned into him. Mom's boyfriend even drops me off at school in his fancy car sometimes. Chapter 4, Silent Investigation. The next morning, Daniel woke with the weight of a boulder pressing on his chest. Ellie's words from the day before still echoed in his head like a taunt he couldn't erase. Jessica moved beside him, her breathing steady, her face peaceful in sleep. He stared at her for a long moment, trying to reconcile this familiar image, the woman he'd spent nearly 2 decades loving, with the ugly truth those words hinted at. When she stirred, stretching with a yawn, Daniel forced his eyes shut, pretending to be asleep. He wasn't ready to talk, not yet. He needed answers, proof. Over the next few days, he became a shadow in his own house. He started watching everything with a silent, sharpened awareness. Jessica's business meetings seemed to have doubled overnight. On Wednesday evening, she breezed through the door in a sleek navy dress he'd never seen before, the kind of dress that clung to her curves and made her look like she belonged in a high-end bar rather than at a charity fundraiser. "Wow," Daniel said, feigning casual interest as he set down his coffee mug. "That's new. Big meeting." Jessica gave a quick smile, slipping her heels on. "Yeah, some networking for the fundraiser. You know how these things are. It's all about making connections." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Fancy dress for networking. Who are you trying to impress?" She shot him a look that hovered between playful and defensive. "Don't start, Daniel. I just want to look nice. Is that a crime?" He chuckled, but it was hollow. "No crime. Just asking." She kissed him quickly on the cheek and left. Her perfume lingered in the air long after the front door shut. That night, while Jessica was networking, Daniel decided to check the kitchen counter where she usually dropped her receipts. There were none. He opened the trash can, just grocery receipts and old mail. No sign of where she'd been or what she'd bought. He sat at the table, his hands clasped together, the unease inside him now a steady, burning knot. Was I blind this whole time? Was she slipping away while I was too busy working overtime? Ellie wasn't much help either. On Friday morning, she casually mentioned, "Mom's friend said he'd pick me up for school again today. He's got this really cool car like one of those black Autos." Daniel froze mid-bite of his toast. "Mom's friend, yeah," Ellie said, scrolling through her phone without looking at him. "He's nice. He always buys me a latte before school. Says I remind him of his niece." Daniel forced a smile, though his jaw clenched. "Does this friend have a name?" Ellie glanced up, then shrugged. "I don't know. Mom just calls him Mike." Mike. The name burned into Daniel's brain like acid. That evening, Daniel sat in his truck outside the house, gripping the steering wheel. He had left work an hour early, but hadn't gone inside yet. His mind spun with questions and ugly images he couldn't shake. When he finally entered, Jessica was in the kitchen, humming as she unpacked what looked like a high-end handbag. "That's new," Daniel said, nodding toward the bag. "Where'd you get it?" Jessica looked up, startled, then smiled a little too quickly. "Oh, this? I found it on sale at that boutique downtown." "On sale?" Daniel walked closer, picking up the bag. The leather was soft, the logo embossed. He didn't know much about designer brands, but even he knew this wasn't cheap. "How much was on sale, Jess?" Her smile faltered. "Daniel, don't start grilling me about every purchase. I work too. I'm allowed to buy myself something nice." "I'm not grilling you," he said evenly, setting the bag down. "I just want to know what's going on. We're supposed to be saving for Ellie's tuition. I don't even remember the last time we went out together, but there's always new stuff popping up around here." Jessica rolled her eyes. "You're overthinking everything. It's just a purse. Can we not make this a big deal?" Daniel nodded slowly, forcing himself to drop it, but his chest burned with the effort. That night, when everyone was asleep, Daniel slipped out of bed and went to his office in the corner of the basement. He pulled up their online banking statements. His eyes scanned every transaction, his heart sinking with each unfamiliar charge. There were dinners at expensive restaurants, boutique charges, and even a charge from a spa he knew Jessica had never mentioned. What the hell is this? He thought, his hands trembling as he clicked through the pages. He opened the phone bill next. Dozens of calls and texts to an unknown number, always late at night or during his shifts. A name wasn't attached to it, just a number, like a ghost haunting his life. The next day, Daniel tried to act normal, but every smile felt like a lie. Every time Jessica's phone buzzed, he felt his stomach twist into knots. At breakfast, he said casually, "Hey Jess, maybe we should sit down and go over the finances soon. With Ellie's college coming up, I want to make sure we're on track." Jessica didn't look up from her phone. "Daniel, relax. We're fine. You stress too much about money." "Do I?" he asked, a little sharper than intended. "Because from where I'm sitting, I don't even know what's going on half the time." Jessica sighed. "Daniel, I don't have time for this conversation right now. Can we do it later? I've got a meeting." Meeting. The word was starting to sound like poison. After she left, Daniel sat alone at the table, his coffee cold. His mind was a storm of confusion, disbelief, and barely contained rage. Every instinct told him that something was wrong, that he wasn't just imagining things. But if there was one thing Daniel knew, it was patience. He would gather every piece of evidence he could. He would know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Chapter 5, The Breaking Point. The house was silent, but Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room long after midnight, hunched forward on the edge of the couch, his hands locked together so tightly his knuckles turned white. The only light came from the dim lamp in the corner, casting shadows across the room, shadows that seemed to whisper about all the things he didn't want to face. The walls felt too close. The house, once a symbol of everything he had worked for, now seemed to mock him. He stared at the framed family photo on the mantel, Jessica's arm around him, Ellie grinning with her braces. Back then, he believed in the life they had built. He believed love and hard work could weather anything. But now, every memory played like a cruel joke. When did I become the loser dad? The words, overheard from Ellie's phone call, cut deeper than anything he'd ever felt. He had worked himself to the bone, double shifts, late nights, weekends. Also, Jessica could stay comfortable, and Ellie could dream big. He'd skipped fishing trips with his friends, delayed vacations, ignored his own hobbies. All because family came first. And yet, here he was, a stranger in his own home. Was I blind this whole time? Or did I just not want to see? He thought about Jessica, the way her eyes sparkled when she looked at her phone, but barely lit up when she looked at him. He thought about Ellie, parroting Jessica's disdain as though he was nothing more than a wallet with a heartbeat. Daniel rubbed his hands over his face, exhaling slowly. I gave them everything, he muttered into the quiet. And this is what I get. For hours, he sat there, staring at nothing, replaying every moment of their marriage. The day he proposed, kneeling on a lakeshore with a cheap ring but a heart full of love. The first night they brought Ellie home from the hospital, exhausted but happy. The little moments, the laughter, the arguments, the silent forgiveness. Were all those moments real? Or had Jessica been drifting away for years while he killed himself, working overtime? Daniel's chest tightened with a mix of rage and heartbreak. A bitter laugh escaped his throat. Clueless. That's what I am, right? Just the clueless loser dad. He stood abruptly, pacing the living room, his bare feet quiet on the hardwood floor. He didn't feel like the loser they thought he was. He felt like a man who'd been pushed too far, and something inside him finally snapped. The plan began to form in his mind, not out of spite at first, but out of a need to take control. If they're waiting to ditch me, fine. Let's see how they do when the gravy train stops. Daniel grabbed his laptop from the table and opened his banking accounts. The screen glowed in the dark as he scrolled through the numbers. There was every paycheck, every dollar he had saved for Ellie's tuition, every cent he had earned by sacrificing time, sleep, and health. His finger hovered over the mouse for a moment before clicking into action. Not anymore, he whispered. First, he logged into the college payment portal and canceled the upcoming tuition installment. His hands trembled slightly, but his jaw was set. Why should I pay for someone who thinks I'm a joke? Then he opened the joint checking account. Jessica's name sat next to his on the screen, but the balance would soon tell a different story. With a few calculated clicks, he drained the account, transferring every last dollar into his personal savings, an account she didn't know about. Next came the credit cards. He cut the limit on the joint card, setting it low enough that she wouldn't be able to spend on luxury dinners or networking outings without hitting a wall. And finally, he checked the house and car titles. He'd worked hard to pay off the mortgage early, and every asset that mattered was in both their names. That wouldn't last. By 2 a.m., Daniel sat back on the couch, his plan taking shape like steel forged in fire. He wasn't just going to walk away. He was going to make sure they understood what they'd thrown away. He reached for a pen and paper, his mind buzzing. Words didn't come easy. How do you sum up 20 years of love, betrayal, and pain in a few lines? But he wasn't aiming for poetry. He wanted the truth, raw and cold. Congratulations on your future in Miami, he wrote in bold letters, the ink biting into the page. Enjoy it on your own dime. He stared at the note for a long time. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. They thought they had played him, but they'd underestimated just how much he'd endured, how much steel was under all that quiet loyalty. The next morning, Jessica moved around the kitchen in a rush. sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone like always. Ellie came down the stairs, grumbling about homework and needing gas money. Daniel watched them from the table, a calmness settling over him, though inside he felt like a volcano ready to erupt. Jessica glanced at him. "You're quiet this morning. Everything okay?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah, everything's fine." But in his head, the decision was made. Enjoy Miami on your own dime. Chapter 6, The Goodbye. The sun had barely risen when Daniel sat at the kitchen table, a stack of documents spread out before him. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room as he clicked the pen in his hand, the metal tip glinting under the soft light. The divorce papers were neatly arranged, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. Every line, every clause was a bitter reminder of how far things had fallen. He'd spent hours with his lawyer over the last few days, quietly and methodically preparing this moment. The house, the accounts, the car, everything was already transferred or locked down. All that was left was this final, brutal note. He slid a blank sheet of paper in front of him, exhaled slowly, and wrote in bold strokes. "Congratulations on your future in Miami. Enjoy it on your own dime." Daniel set the pen down and stared at the words, feeling an odd mix of rage and relief wash over him. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't soft, but it was enough. By 7 a.m., the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Jessica walked in, her hair still damp from the shower, dressed in a fitted blouse and jeans. She looked sharp, ready for another one of her meetings. She smiled faintly when she saw him sitting there, but something in his stillness made her pause. "You're up early," she said, reaching for a mug. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Daniel replied evenly, folding his hands on the table. His voice was calm, eerily calm, even to his own ears. Jessica poured herself coffee, watching him over the rim of the cup. "You seem, I don't know, quiet. Is this about money again? Because I told you no." Daniel interrupted softly but firmly. "It's not about money. Not anymore." Jessica raised an eyebrow, taken aback by the finality in his tone. "Okay, what's that supposed to mean?" Daniel just smiled faintly. "Don't worry about it. You'll understand soon enough." Ellie came clattering down the stairs, phone in hand, earbuds dangling around her neck. "Morning," she mumbled, grabbing a granola bar from the counter. "Can I get some cash for gas?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening. She didn't notice. She was already lost in a stream of notifications buzzing on her phone. "Check the counter," Daniel said. There was a crisp $20 bill waiting for her, placed beside the divorce papers he'd stacked neatly. She picked it up without a glance, stuffing it into her pocket. "Thanks, Dad," she said, already halfway out the door. Jessica sighed. "You spoil her, you know that? She'll never learn the value of a dollar if you keep handing it over." Daniel smirked at that, the irony almost making him laugh. "Value of a dollar. That's rich coming from you." Jessica sat at the table across from him, sipping her coffee. "So, are we going to talk about what's been eating you lately? Because I feel like you've been distant." Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Distant," he echoed. "Yeah, maybe I just finally see things clearly." Jessica frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Daniel said, standing slowly, "that I'm done being the guy you and your friends laugh about." She blinked, confused. "What?" Daniel didn't answer. He walked over to the counter, picked up his keys, and slipped them into his jacket pocket. He could feel her eyes following him, suspicion rising like a tide. "Daniel, what's going on?" Jessica demanded, setting her mug down with a sharp clink. He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Nothing you need to worry about right now. Everything you need to know is on the table." Her gaze flicked to the stack of papers, but she didn't reach for them yet. "What is that?" "You'll see," Daniel said, his tone flat. For a moment, silence filled the kitchen. The air was thick, heavy with tension. Jessica's brow furrowed, as if trying to decipher him. "Are you seriously just going to walk out?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. Daniel gave a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah, I am. I've spent years breaking my back for this family. And for what? So I can be the clueless loser in my own home? Nah, I'm done playing that part." Jessica's lips parted, as if to say something, but no words came. Daniel took one last look around the kitchen. The smell of coffee, the clinking mugs, the hum of the refrigerator, every detail felt like the closing scene of a life he was leaving behind. He placed the note carefully on top of the divorce papers, ensuring the words were visible, bold, and unmistakable. Congratulations on your future in Miami. Enjoy it on your own dime. Jessica's eyes widened slightly as she read the top line, but Daniel didn't stick around to watch her reaction. He grabbed his jacket, slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward the door. Jessica called after him, her voice sharp and confused. "Daniel, what the hell is this?" He paused just long enough to glance back. "It's the truth," he said simply. Then he opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind him with finality. Daniel climbed into his truck, the morning air crisp against his skin. For a moment, he sat there, hands on the steering wheel, taking in the stillness. He could see Jessica through the window, standing in the kitchen, staring at the papers as if they might explode. He started the engine. With a low rumble, the truck rolled out of the driveway. Daniel didn't look back. Not once. Chapter 7, Ghost. 3 years had passed since Daniel vanished from the life he once called his own. The first few months after leaving had been the hardest. Like breaking out of a prison he hadn't realized he was locked inside. He moved 3 states over to a city where no one knew his name, no one knew his story. The skyline was different, the people were strangers, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was suffocating under someone else's expectations. Daniel rented a 1-bedroom apartment above a mechanic's garage, the kind of place that smelled faintly of oil and dust, but felt like freedom. He started small, just a duffel bag with his essentials, the savings he'd transferred before walking away, and a mind still buzzing with betrayal. He remembered lying on that thin mattress during his first night there, staring at the ceiling fan as it creaked, the silence of the room deafening. There were no footsteps from Ellie rushing down the stairs, no sound of Jessica's voice dripping with irritation. Just him and the weight of what had happened. But as the weeks turned into months, the silence stopped feeling empty. It began to feel like peace. Daniel found work at a construction firm in the city, taking jobs that were physically demanding but honest. There was something satisfying about sweating for a paycheck that was his alone, unshared and unmocked. He spent long hours working, but for once, he wasn't doing it to prove anything to anyone. By the end of the first year, he'd save enough to invest in himself. He started attending night classes, learning about real estate and small business management. Every evening, he'd sit in that little apartment, going through his notes, building a plan. And by the second year, Daniel wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. He had bought into a local property renovation venture with one of his classmates, a sharp, no-nonsense guy named Jason who appreciated Daniel's grit. Together, they flipped rundown houses into homes worth something. The bank account that once bled dry with Jessica's spending was now growing faster than he'd ever imagined. But success didn't erase the past. Late at night, when he was alone with a glass of whiskey and the glow of the city through his window, he'd sometimes think of Ellie. He'd hear her voice in his head, mocking him, "Loser dad." The memory still burned, but it didn't consume him like it once did. And Jessica, he didn't think of her with longing anymore. No. Those thoughts were like watching a fire burn out. The woman who'd once been his entire world was now just smoke and ash. The messages started coming 6 weeks after he left. At first, Jessica's voice was venomous. "Daniel, what the hell have you done? You drained the accounts? You think you can just walk away like this? Call me back. Now." The next voicemail was angrier. "Do you know what you've done to Ellie's tuition? To me? You can't just vanish. This is not over, Daniel." But when she realized he wasn't answering, the tone changed. "Please, Daniel, let's talk. I don't know why you're doing this, but we can fix it. I didn't mean what I said. We didn't mean it." Daniel would sit there sometimes, listening to her voice crack through his burner phone, and feel nothing. Not anger, not love, just nothing. He deleted every voicemail after the first listen. There were texts too, pages of them, some threatening legal action, others begging him to come home. "You're being cruel, Daniel. Think about Ellie. She needs her father. That one made him laugh bitterly. Did she need me when she was laughing about her loser dad to her friends?" He ignored them all. His lawyer confirmed what he already knew. Jessica had no claim on the assets he'd moved before filing. The divorce had gone through without a hitch. He had signed every document, ensured she got nothing more than what was legally required, and then closed that chapter for good. By year 2, the messages stopped coming as often. A text here or there, sometimes from unfamiliar numbers. Once, Jason noticed Daniel staring at his phone, his jaw tight. "Ghost from your past?" Jason asked. Daniel smirked and set the phone down. Something like that. "Ghosts don't scare me anymore." It was true. He had become a ghost himself. To Jessica, to Ellie, to the man he used to be. There were moments, though, quiet, unguarded moments, where he'd wonder what Ellie thought now. Was she angry? Resentful? Or did she finally realize what her words had done? Sometimes he'd think about reaching out, just to see if she would even pick up. But then he'd remember that phone call, those careless, cruel words, and the urge would fade like smoke. By the 3rd year, Daniel's life looked nothing like the one he left behind. He had traded the quiet misery of suburbia for the hum of city life. His renovated loft apartment was spacious and clean, filled with furniture he chose because he liked it, not because it matched Jessica's idea of style. His wardrobe had changed too. No more worn-out work boots and oil-stained jackets. He wore fitted shirts, nice jeans, and boots that looked good even when covered in sawdust. Jason teased him about it once, saying, "You're starting to look like one of those guys who actually enjoys life." "Maybe I do," Daniel replied, and meant it. That night, sitting by the window with the city lights stretching out like stars below him, Daniel thought about how far he had come. He wasn't the man who begged for scraps of appreciation anymore. He had rebuilt himself, his dignity, his wealth, his life. Jessica and Ellie? They were just chapters of an old book he'd left behind on a dusty shelf. Still, every now and then, he wondered if Jessica ever told her boyfriend how she got left with nothing but a note. Chapter 8, The Encounter. It was a chilly evening in early autumn, the kind where the city's skyline looked sharper under the pale orange glow of sunset. Daniel stepped out of a cafe near his loft, a to-go coffee in hand, when he saw her. At first, he didn't recognize her. The young woman sitting on the bench across the street looked tired, her hood pulled up, a backpack slumped at her feet. Her shoulders were hunched, her gaze fixed on the ground as though she were bracing herself against the world. But then she shifted slightly, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Ellie. She was older now. 3 years had added lines of weariness to her once carefree face. Her hair, which used to shine under the sunlight, was tangled and dull. The sharpness of her eyes was still there, but something in them had changed. Daniel stood there for a long moment, frozen, the noise of the city fading into the background. Memories flooded in, her voice mocking him over the phone, the way she laughed at the idea of him being clueless. He'd sworn he would never look back, never give them the satisfaction of seeing him hurt again. And yet, his feet started moving toward her. Ellie glanced up when she noticed someone approaching, and for a moment, confusion flickered across her face. Then recognition dawned, and her eyes widened. "Dad?" she whispered, as if saying it too loud might break the moment. Daniel stopped a few feet away, his coffee still warm in his hand. "Ellie," he said quietly. His voice was calm, even but inside his heart pounded. She stood, her backpack sliding off the bench. "Oh my God, it's you." Her voice cracked slightly. I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Daniel tilted his head, studying her. "I wasn't planning on being seen." For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the things they hadn't said in 3 years. Ellie was the first to break it. I'm sorry," she blurted out, her voice trembling. "I know you probably hate me. God, you should hate me." Daniel took a slow sip of his coffee, his expression unreadable. "You said some things, yeah," he replied. "Things I didn't expect from my own daughter. I was stupid," Ellie said quickly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't understand. I thought Mom was right. She made it sound like you didn't care. I believed her." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting her speak. "I dropped out of college," Ellie admitted after a moment. "The tuition, it all fell apart after you left." Mom said she'd figured out with Mike, but Daniel's eyebrow lifted. Mike, she swallowed hard. Yeah, he's gone now. Took a bunch of her money, and well, you can guess. She's not doing great. Daniel let out a low breath. Not surprised. I'm not asking for money, Ellie added quickly, her voice desperate. Dad, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For what I said. I was awful. I called you a loser, and you were the one who worked for everything. You built everything we had. I see that now. Daniel looked at her for a long time, his mind quiet but sharp. 3 years ago, those words would have shattered him. Now, they barely scratched the surface. You were young, he said finally, and you believed what you wanted to believe. I can't change that. Ellie's lips trembled. But I can. I want to fix it. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but Daniel held up a hand. Stop. His tone was firm, but not unkind. Ellie, I'm not the same man I was back then. I spent too long breaking my back for people who didn't see me. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not going back to that life either. Ellie sniffled, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. I miss you, she said softly. I thought I'd be better off without you around, but I was wrong. You're the only one who ever really cared. Daniel's gaze softened for just a moment. He stepped closer, close enough to see how much she had changed, how the years had humbled her. I'll always be your father, he said quietly. But I had to walk away to survive, Ellie. I wasn't going to let myself be torn apart piece by piece. I know, she whispered. The city noise returned around them, horns honking, people rushing past, life continuing as if this moment wasn't hanging on a fragile thread. Daniel took another sip of his coffee, then glanced at her backpack. You got a place to stay? She hesitated. I've been crashing with friends. It's not great. Daniel nodded slowly, his mind working. He wasn't the man who gave away trust easily anymore. Get yourself sorted, he said. Figure out who you want to be. When you're ready, maybe we'll talk again. Ellie looked at him like she wanted to hug him, but she didn't move. You're different, she said, almost in awe. You're stronger. Daniel smirked faintly. I had to be. She watched as he turned to leave, his shoulders broad and steady. Nothing like the worn-out man she once mocked. For the first time, Ellie seemed to realize the full weight of what she'd lost. Not just her father, but the man who had built everything for them. Chapter 9, Jessica's Fall. It started with a single text from an unknown number. Daniel, please. We need to talk. He stared at the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen before he finally set the phone down. He didn't need to guess who it was. Only one person from his past would have the nerve to reach out like that, after everything. Jessica. Daniel was in his loft, the early morning sunlight pouring through the tall windows, casting long streaks across the polished floor. His life now was calm, measured. He didn't wake up to chaos or manipulation anymore. And yet, reading that text, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: amusement. 2 days later, Jason dropped by to discuss their next property bid. As they sat over coffee, Jason glanced at Daniel's phone buzzing on the counter. You gonna get that? Jason asked. Daniel didn't even look at it. No. Jason smirked. Old ghost again. Daniel leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of his coffee. Jessica. She's been trying to get through to me. Guess life in Miami didn't go the way she planned. Jason chuckled. Can't say I'm shocked. People like her burn through everything they touch. She wants something, right? Always does, Daniel said, his tone calm but laced with steel. The messages kept coming. Daniel, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Mike left. He took everything. I'm broke. I don't know what to do. Please answer. I just want to talk. Daniel ignored them all until one night, when his curiosity got the better of him. He let her call go to voicemail, then played it while sitting on the edge of his bed. Her voice was shaky, desperate, so different from the sharp, confident tone he remembered. Daniel, I don't know where to start. Everything's gone. Mike, he left me. Took my savings, the car, everything. I can't pay rent. I just want to make things right. Please. I was stupid. I didn't see what I had. You were always there, and I threw it all away. Please, just call me back. I need you. Daniel listened to the message twice, then deleted it without a word. A week passed before he finally answered her call. He was driving back from a site visit, the sunset painting the sky with fiery streaks when the phone rang. He saw her name flashing on the screen, and this time, he pressed accept. There was a pause on the other end, then a breathless, "Daniel?" "Jessica," he said flatly. "Oh my God, you answered." She let out a shaky laugh. I thought you'd never speak to me again." "I almost didn't," he replied, his voice even calm, unshaken. There was silence, then her voice cracked. "I've made so many mistakes, Daniel. I ruined everything. Mike wasn't who I thought he was. He took all my money and left me with nothing. I can't even pay the bills. I need your help." Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but his tone remained cool. "My help? You want help from your loser dad? The same man you mocked? The man you and Mike and Ellie laughed about?" Her breath hitched. "Daniel, please, I wasn't thinking. I was wrong. You were always the one who held us together. I see that now. I want to make things right. We could start over. Please." Daniel let out a quiet laugh, low and humorless. "Start over?" "Yes," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve it, but I've lost everything. You were the only man who ever truly loved me. I can see that now. I need another chance. Please, Daniel, please." He pulled the truck to a stop at a quiet overlook, the city lights glowing in the distance. For a moment, he said nothing, just listening to her plead, her voice cracking with each desperate word. Then he spoke, his voice cutting through her sobs like a blade. "You had your chance," he said coldly. "I was the man who would have died for you. I would have worked myself into the ground to give you everything. And you threw it all away for some guy with a fancy car." "Daniel, I know." He interrupted, his voice like iron. "You made your choice, and now you're living with it. That's not my problem anymore." Jessica's breath came in shaky gasps. "You can't just turn your back on me like this. Not after everything we had." Daniel's voice was calm, almost detached, but each word landed like a hammer. "Everything we had died the moment you looked at me and saw a paycheck instead of a man. I'm not that guy anymore. I don't even remember who you are." There was silence on the line. He could hear her trying to find the words, but nothing came. "Goodbye, Jessica," he said finally. His tone was final, absolute. He ended the call without waiting for her response and set the phone down on the passenger seat. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring out at the city lights. There was no satisfaction, no gloating, just peace. The ghost of his past had come crawling back, but it no longer had any power over him. Chapter 10, Redemption and Closing Line. Daniel stood on the balcony of his downtown apartment, the city stretching out beneath him like a sea of twinkling stars. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. 3 years ago, this life would have seemed impossible, a distant dream trapped behind the cold walls of a broken marriage and shattered trust. But now, with the hum of the city below and the quiet strength in his chest, Daniel knew he had reclaimed more than just his freedom. He had reclaimed himself. Inside the apartment, the late afternoon sunlight fell across a neat stack of papers on his desk, blueprints for a new property development, contracts ready for signatures. His phone sat nearby, silent and waiting. He smiled, thinking about how far he'd come, from a man who felt invisible in his own home to someone respected by colleagues and trusted by partners like Jason. Success wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, about waking up each day knowing he was enough just as he was. The doorbell rang, pulling Daniel's attention from his thoughts. He opened the door to find Ellie standing there, her eyes cautious but hopeful. She looked different from the last time they met, stronger, humbled. The years had taken their toll on her, but she was here. "Dad," she said quietly. Daniel stepped aside, letting her in. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the silence between them filled with years of unspoken words. Ellie fiddled with her coffee cup, avoiding his gaze. "I've been thinking," she began, "about everything. About you." Daniel nodded. "Good. I know I can't undo the past," she said, voice small. "But I want to try, for whatever it's worth." He studied her, seeing the earnestness behind her hesitation. "Ellie," he said, his voice steady, "loyalty and respect, those are the only things that matter. Lose them, and you've got nothing." Her eyes glistened. I know. I was stupid to think otherwise. For a long moment, they just sat there, not as perfect family, not as enemies, but as two people trying to bridge a divide built on years of hurt. I'm proud of you, Daniel said softly. Not for who you were, but for who you're becoming. Ellie's lips quivered. Thanks, Dad. That night, Daniel stood on the balcony once more, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. He thought about betrayal, the way it had nearly broken him, the way it had forced him to fall apart before he could rebuild. Some betrayals don't just break you. They forge you into someone stronger. And once you're forged, you never go back.